It was supposed to be a night of celebration. 600 guests. Crystal chandeliers. A grand ballroom that my mother-in-law had spent months preparing. The Whitmore family charitable gala. The most important social event of their year. And I was there, dressed in champagne, smiling, playing the role I had been playing for 9 years. But that night, Rosalind went too far. She had been making comments all evening. Small ones at first. The kind she always made, wrapped in silk so no one could call them cruel. But as the night went on, the comments got louder, more deliberate, more public. And then, in front of city officials, journalists, my own colleagues, she looked at me and said I was unfinished, that I was a project they had tried to improve, and failed. 600 people heard it. And for the first time in 9 years, I spoke back, calmly, clearly, with everything I had swallowed for nearly a decade. And that's when my husband stepped toward me. That's when he raised his hand. 600 people went completely silent. I stood there, hand pressed to my cheek, and I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. I just reached into my clutch, pulled out my phone, and made one call. Mom, please come. She didn't ask a single question. She just said, I'm already in the car. And what happened next? It didn't just end my marriage. It dismantled everything the Whitmore family had spent decades building. My name is Serena, and this is my story. I want to take you back to the very beginning, because nothing about that night at the gala came out of nowhere. Every storm has a season before it. Mine lasted 9 years. I was 26 when I met Colton Whitmore. And I want to be honest with you, he was extraordinary. The kind of man who makes you feel like the whole room tilts in your direction when he smiles at you. He was smart. He was charming. He had this laugh that made strangers turn around just to see where it was coming from. We met at a charity auction my mother's firm had organized. He bought a painting he didn't need just to have a reason to talk to me afterward. I thought that was romantic. I was not wrong about that part. He was romantic. In the beginning. What I was wrong about was thinking that was who he actually was. We dated for 10 months. He proposed on a Tuesday, which sounds ordinary, but he made it feel like the most important Tuesday in the history of Tuesdays. He took me to the rooftop of the building where we'd had our first real conversation, set up string lights that his assistant had spent 3 hours arranging, and got down on one knee with a ring that his grandmother had worn for 40 years. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. I called my mother from the elevator ride down. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Serena, I want you to be sure. I laughed. Mom, I'm sure. Another pause. Okay, baby. Then I'm happy for you. My mother, Catherine Aldridge, has never been the kind of woman who says, I told you so. Not once in my life. Not even when she was right. And she was right that night. She just loved me too much to say it out loud. The Whitmore family had money the way some people have opinions. Loudly, constantly, and always aimed at someone. Colton's mother, Rosalind Whitmore, was a woman who had turned cruelty into an art form so refined that most people didn't even recognize it as cruelty. She wrapped her insults in silk. She delivered her judgments with a smile. And she was so precise about it that you leave a conversation with her and only realize an hour later that she had just dismantled your entire sense of self. The first time I met her, I wore a dress I had spent 3 weeks picking out. She looked at me from head to toe and said, How refreshing. You dress practically. I smiled. Thank you. She hadn't meant it as a compliment. I understood that later. Colton's father, Gerald, was quieter. Not kind, just quieter. He had the energy of a man who had long ago decided that agreeing with his wife was simply less exhausting than the alternative. And then there was Colton's younger sister, Brianna, who had the same sharp eyes as her mother but hadn't yet learned to disguise them as warmly. She decided she didn't like me on the day she met me. She made sure I knew it. Colton's last girlfriend went to Princeton. She told me at our first family dinner, while reaching across me for the bread basket without excusing herself. That's interesting, I said. She was very polished. Also interesting. She looked at me. You're not what I expected. I get that a lot, I said pleasantly and turned back to my soup. I want to tell you I handled every moment like that with grace. I want to tell you I never let them get to me. But that would be a lie, and this story is only worth telling if I tell it truthfully. They got to me. Slowly. Over years. The comments about how I kept our home. The way Rosalind would rearrange things when she visited, as if my choices were mistakes waiting to be corrected. The offhand remarks about Colton's potential, always phrased in a way that made it sound like I was the ceiling, not the sky. And Colton? He never defended me. Not once. In the beginning, I told myself he didn't notice. Then I told myself he was conflict avoidant. Then I told myself he was under pressure from his family. By year 7, I had run out of explanations. He just didn't defend me. Full stop. 3 years before the night of the gala, things shifted in a way I couldn't ignore. My mother's consulting firm, Aldridge Group, had spent years building quietly. She wasn't flashy about it. She took on the right clients, turned down the wrong ones, and reinvested profits the way other people reinvest belief. Patient. Strategic. Visionary. The year I turned 33, Aldridge Group closed a deal that put them on the financial pages of 3 national publications. It was, by any measure, extraordinary. I was proud of her in a way that lived in my chest like a second heartbeat. Rosalind's reaction when I mentioned it at a family dinner. "Oh, how nice. Gerald's nephew just made partner at his law firm. Did we tell you?" And then she turned away. I looked at Colton. He was cutting his steak. That was the night I first let myself think a thought I had been pushing away for years. He is not on my side. It came in quietly, like a draft under a door. I didn't say it out loud. I put it away. But from that night on, it was always there. Things at home had grown cold in a way that's hard to explain to someone who hasn't lived it. We weren't fighting. We were barely talking. We shared a house the way 2 strangers share a waiting room. Politely, silently, looking in different directions. I had thrown myself into my work. I was a senior architect at a design firm, and I was good at it. I had a team that believed in me, clients who asked for me specifically, and projects I was genuinely proud of. But I came home to silence. And silence, after long enough, starts to sound like an answer. The Whitmore Family Charitable Gala was an annual event that Rosalind had founded 14 years ago. It was the social crown jewel of their world. A black-tie fundraiser held at the Whitmore Estates Grand Ballroom, with 600 guests including city officials, business executives, old money, new money, and every variety of social influence in between. I had attended every year since marrying Colton. Every year, Rosalind found a way to remind me, in front of whichever audience was most convenient, that I was a guest in her world rather than a member of it. But this year was the 10-year anniversary of the gala. It was bigger, more formal, more watched. And something in me was different going in. I can't explain it fully, but I had spent the previous 6 months in a kind of quiet reckoning with myself. Therapy helped. My mother's steady presence helped. And maybe, some part of me had already begun to understand that this chapter of my life was ending, even if I hadn't said it out loud yet. I wore a champagne gown that I had picked entirely for myself. No one's input. No compromise. I looked beautiful. I knew it. And I walked in without apologizing for it. The evening started the way these evenings always started. Cocktails, introductions, the slow current of small talk that carries people from one conversation to the next. And then the dinner seating began. I was placed, not beside Colton as a wife would normally be, but 3 seats away, between 2 of Rosalind's close friends. Women who looked at me with the practiced warmth of people who have been briefed. Colton sat beside his mother. I noticed. I said nothing. The first comment came before the appetizers were cleared. Rosalind, speaking to the table broadly but making sure I could hear, "I always say that this family has been built on intentional choices. Every person at this table was chosen carefully. Her friend, playing along, and what a table it is." Rosalind smiled and glanced at me briefly. Mostly, soft laughter from the women beside me. I picked up my water glass, took a sip, set it down. The second comment came during the main course. The conversation had turned to philanthropy, legacy, the Whitmore family name. Rosalind said, "Colton has always understood that a man's reputation is shaped not just by his work, but by every choice he makes, every association, every attachment." She let the words sit there. And I felt 600 miles of silence open up between me and my husband, who sat 3 chairs away and said absolutely nothing. The third comment came after the keynote speaker finished. The room was buzzing. People were moving, greeting, clinking glasses. And Rosalind, standing now in front of a small group that included 2 city council members, a prominent local journalist, and my own firm's senior partner, who I had not realized was attending, looked at me and said, clearly calmly, "Serena has always been a project in progress. We've tried to help her along. Some things simply can't be finished." Laughter. Polite, awful laughter. My senior partner looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. And something in me, that quiet, long-suppressed thing, finally opened. I said, "Rosalind, I've sat quietly at your table for 9 years. I've let a great many things go unaddressed out of respect for your son and your family. But I will not let that one go." The laughter stopped. The nearby conversation slowed. I am not a project. I am not in progress. I am a licensed architect with 14 years of experience, a career I built without anyone's help, and a mother whose business acumen has outlasted every trend your social circle has chased in the last decade. I am a whole, complete person. And I am done being spoken about as though I am an inconvenience in a room I have every right to stand in. Silence. Real silence. Then Colton, my husband, stepped toward me. And I saw it in his face before it happened. The shame. The fury. The absolute unwillingness to be made uncomfortable in front of these people. He raised his hand. And he brought it down. It wasn't a full strike. It was a sharp, brief contact against my cheek, more shock than force. But in the silence of that room, with 600 people witnessing, it might as well have been thunder. Gasps spread through the room like a wave. I stood very still. I pressed my hand to my cheek. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I felt nothing that surprised me. Only the confirmation of something I had already known. I reached into my clutch. I pulled out my phone. I walked, not ran, walked, to the far edge of the room, near the tall windows that looked out over the garden. And I called my mother. "Mom, please come." 1 second of quiet. Then, I'm already in the car. I stood by those windows for 53 minutes. People approached me. Some with concern. Some with discomfort. Some, I think, with curiosity. I thanked them politely and said I was fine. I was not fine, but I was composed. And in that moment, composed was the most powerful thing I could be. My firm's senior partner, a woman named Patricia, who I had always respected deeply, came and stood beside me. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "You were right. About everything you said." I nodded. "Are you safe?" she asked. "I will be," I said. She pressed her business card into my hand. Not my work card, her personal cell. "Call me. Whatever you need." When my mother arrived, I met her at the front entrance. She didn't say anything when she saw my face. She just opened her arms. I let myself cry for exactly 4 minutes. Then I pulled back, looked at her and said, "Okay, what do we do?" And my mother, Catherine Aldridge, the woman who had built a business empire in quiet, who had never once asked anyone to make room for her because she simply made her own, smiled at me. "We do everything correctly," she said. "And we do it first." My mother had not built the Aldridge Group by being reactive. She had built it by being patient, precise, and 3 steps ahead of everyone who underestimated her. That night, she drove me to her house. I didn't go back to mine. By morning, she had already made 2 calls. The first was to her personal attorney, one of the sharpest family law specialists in the state, a woman named Dr. Joanna Marsh, who had handled cases for some of the most powerful families in the country and had never once lost a contested settlement. The second call was to her financial advisor, who had, over the years, quietly helped me set up personal accounts and investments entirely separate from Colton's and my joint finances, something my mother had insisted on when we married, and something I had done without fully understanding why. I understood why now. I met with Dr. Marsh the next morning. She was calm, methodical, and thorough. She asked me to walk through the full timeline, not just that night, but the 9 years before it. The comments. The isolation. The way Colton had consistently failed to address his family's behavior. The financial dynamics. The documented moments I had photographed or saved over the years, not out of suspicion, but out of a low-grade awareness that something wasn't right. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she looked at her notes and said, "You have more than you think you have." Meanwhile, the gala had not been a quiet affair. 600 people had witnessed what happened. And in the age of smartphones and social circles, 600 witnesses don't stay quiet. By the next afternoon, what had happened at the Whitmore Gala was the subject of whispered conversations across every social and professional network in the city. My senior partner Patricia had, independently, filed a formal report with our firm's HR department, not about me, but about the behavior of a key client of the firm who was closely connected to the Whitmore family. She had been looking for a reason for some time. This gave her one. The Whitmore family's charitable foundation began receiving questions from two of its largest institutional donors, who had been in that ballroom and had found what they witnessed inconsistent with the values the foundation publicly championed. None of this was my doing directly, but all of it was the consequence of what had been done to me in a room full of witnesses. Colton called me 14 times in the first 48 hours. I did not answer. He sent messages. First apologetic, then confused, then, and this was the most revealing, defensive. One message read, "You embarrassed my family in front of everyone." I reacted. Anyone would have. I showed it to Dr. Marsh. She saved it. Rosalind, to my genuine astonishment, reached out through a mutual social acquaintance, not directly, never directly, to suggest that a private resolution would be in everyone's best interest. That public attention on the matter was beneath all parties involved. I had Dr. Marsh respond on my behalf. The response was, in legal language, the equivalent of, "We'll be handling this formally. Thank you." What Rosalind didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my mother had been quietly building something for the past 3 years that was about to become very relevant. Aldridge Group had been in extended negotiations with a real estate development coalition that was considering a major urban revitalization project in the city's downtown corridor. The Whitmore Development Group, Colton's family's company, had also submitted a proposal for the same project. They had assumed, I think, that having Colton's wife inside the Aldridge family orbit was useful to them. A connection. An insurance policy. They had never once stopped to consider that my mother was not a connection to be used. She was a force to be reckoned with. 3 weeks after the gala, the coalition announced its decision. Aldridge Group's proposal had been selected. The Whitmore Development Group's proposal had not. The announcement cited alignment of values, long-term community vision, and, pointedly, the organizational culture that each company's leadership exemplified. Gerald Whitmore called my mother personally. She answered. She was polite. She was brief. She said, "I hope your family is well, Gerald. Do take care of yourself." And she ended the call. I want to tell you what the months after looked like, because I think people expect a story like this to end with a dramatic punctuation mark. A final confrontation. A public moment of triumph. But real life is quieter than that. Real justice often doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It arrives like morning. Slowly. Steadily. Without asking permission. My work at the firm deepened in ways I hadn't anticipated. Patricia gave me a leadership role on a project I had been quietly hoping for. A project that, by the end of that year, would win 2 regional design awards and land on the cover of an industry publication. I saw a therapist every week. Not because I was broken, but because I had spent 9 years shrinking myself to fit a space that was never built for me, and I needed help learning how to take up the right amount of room again. I rebuilt friendships I had let go quiet over the years of that marriage. Women I had distanced myself from because Colton's world was always too consuming, too present, too demanding of my social energy. They came back. Most of them. People are more forgiving than we fear when we've been away. And my mother and I grew into a friendship that I hadn't known was possible between a parent and an adult child. We had lunch every Sunday. We talked about her business, my projects, books we were reading, decisions we were each making. She told me one afternoon that she had known something was wrong on the night of the proposal. That she had heard something careful and managed in my voice when I called her. "Why didn't you say something?" I asked. She looked at me steadily. "Because you needed to find it yourself, Serena. I couldn't find it for you. No one could." I thought about that for a long time. She was right. The truth about hard situations, about relationships that slowly take something from you, is that no one else can see the inside of them clearly enough to pull you out. You have to reach the moment yourself. You have to make the call yourself. All anyone else can do is answer when you do. About 14 months after the gala, I was at a design industry event, a reception for a new civic project announcement. I was there professionally. I was happy. I was present in my own life in a way I hadn't been in years. And across the room, I saw Colton. He was with someone. A woman I didn't recognize. She was laughing at something he'd said with the particular delight of someone who doesn't yet know what she doesn't yet know. He saw me at the same moment I saw him. I watched something move across his face. Regret, maybe. Or just recognition. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt, and I want to be precise about this, complete. I turned back to my conversation. My colleague was telling me about a project in Portland he thought I'd find interesting. I leaned in, genuinely curious. Colton left before the reception ended. I stayed until the last guest. That night, I drove home to my brownstone. I made tea. I sat by the window that looks out over the small courtyard garden I'd been slowly growing since spring. The tulips my mother had given me as seeds were beginning to come up. And I thought, this is what it feels like to have built something real. Not inherited. Not borrowed. Not conditional on someone else's approval. Mine. So I want to leave you with this. There are rooms in life that will try to tell you that you are a guest when you are actually a builder. There are people who will frame your presence as a courtesy when it is, in fact, a contribution. And there will be moments, quiet moments, loud moments, moments in front of 600 people, when you will have a choice. You can stay small to keep the peace. Or you can speak clearly, accept what comes next, and begin building the life that was waiting for you on the other side of that honesty. I chose the second one. It was the hardest and the best decision I have ever made. My mother once told me, real power doesn't announce itself. It simply outlasts everything that tried to stop it. She was right. She usually is. And I want to ask you something before you go. Has there ever been a moment in your life when you stayed quiet longer than you should have, and what finally made you speak? Leave it in the comments. I read every single one. If this story moved you, share it with someone who might need to hear it today. And if you're new here, welcome to Velyra Payback. We tell real stories about real strength. New video every day. I'll see you tomorrow.